Can you hear me okay, Audra? Okay, all right. Well, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiffany O'Neill, and I'm the Executive Director for the Sonoma State University Alumni Association. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Tell Me About Yourself, Mastering the Job Interview, which is co-sponsored by the Sonoma State University Career Center and the Alumni Association. We're excited to spend the next hour with you sharing helpful information that will assist you in your professional career. Today's presentation is being recorded and will be available to you after the program. The presentation, along with a post-event survey, will be emailed to you following today's program. We'd appreciate you taking a few minutes of your time to complete the survey to provide feedback on the content of today's webinar. Both the chat and the Q&A features are enabled during the webinar. As you think of questions related to the presentation, please go ahead and get them to us in the Q&A feature. We'll have about 15 minutes at the end of the presentation to answer questions that come through. Thank you also to those of you who already sent in questions at the time of your registration. If you have any comments or technical issues during the program, you can go ahead and put those into the chat feature as well. So before I introduce you to today's speakers, I'd like to take a moment and introduce you to Audra Verrier, which some of you may know, who is our Sonoma State University Career Center Coordinator, and she will be facilitating the Q&A at the end of the presentation today. Audra brings a wealth of knowledge to her role and is an advocate for empowering students and alumni to be active participants in their career development process. Thanks for being here, Audra. Let's see, and if I can have our speakers, Kaitlin and Katie, join us. There they are. Hi, ladies.
Hi there.
So I'm excited. We have two wonderful guest speakers for today's program and who are both Sonoma State alums. We have Katie Russo and Kaitlin Emch. Katie serves as the Director of Alumni Career Engagement at the University of California, Los Angeles. In this role, she is responsible for creating and delivering all career and professional development programming and resources for UCLA alumni. Though her career has been focused in career development, she is passionate about first-generation student initiatives, as she is a first-generation alumna herself, as well as diversity and inclusion in the workplace, access and equity, leadership development, and the opportunity divide. A California native, Katie received her MA in Higher Education Leadership from the University of San Diego and a BA in Hutchins Liberal Studies from Sonoma State. Our next speaker is Kaitlin Emch. Kaitlin is currently a manager for sales planning at Hulu. She is based in Los Angeles with over 7 years in the advertising and media industry. She has experience at ad agencies working with clients in the theatrical film and apparel business, as well as digital publishers across women's lifestyle and entertainment media. Kaitlin also graduated from Sonoma State with a BA in communications, and she has an emphasis in public relations. Kaitlin and Katie, thank you both for doing this program for us, and I'll turn the program over to you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Tiffany. So to start us off today, I'm going to start out with a brief presentation, just kind of an overview about interviewing, general tips and kind of strategies for success. And then once I'm done with that brief presentation, I'm going to bring Kaitlin back with me, and we're going to be able to I have some questions to ask her as a hiring manager and as someone who is a frequent flyer in the interview world, and ask her for to answer some questions that you all shared and common questions that people ask when preparing for interviews of how to do their best. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and I'm just going to share my screen. Great. Okay, so as Tiffany said, we're going to talk a little bit today about mastering the job interview. And obviously now that's probably the virtual job interview. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about that today as well. So today's plan, once again, you'll get the slide deck and follow-up resources from Tiffany after the webinar today. My presentation is not the be all and end all, but I am going to focus on, some solid interviewing tips for some success and reminders that you can keep in mind as you are preparing and planning for upcoming interviews and while you're applying to jobs. I know there are a range of you joining us today from different industries and you're at different levels of your career, but I just want to highlight that I won't be focusing too much going into detail on industry specific or career level advice. It'll be much more general. And like I said, I'm going to give some general interviewing advice and tips, and then I will bring back Kaitlin to do a little more Q&A with her. So first, just thinking about, and you're welcome to throw your answers in the chat here, but I do want to allow you all, and of course, normally I'm used to doing this presentation in person, but I want you to take a moment to just reflect on interviews that you've had up until this point. So think about past interviews. What did you do well? What would you change if you could go back in time? Feel free to, throw your answers in the chat once again. I'm just curious, kind of as you're reflecting on, I'm sure we all have those interviews that we have highlights from of I crushed it. And then the other ones you walk out and you're like, oh man, like that was not it. So just think for a moment about past interviews and what are some of the areas that you feel like you could improve? What are the areas you feel like you really have down and you're able to do that well, no matter the interview? So talking a little bit about preparation, right? First is knowing yourself well. That is probably the most fundamental tip for interviewing success. So review your skills in relation to the position that you're interviewing for. Know your resume well, all the different things on there, different projects you worked on at past jobs and things like that. And then also think about if there's things on your resume or things that are not on your resume that are relevant and might be worth sharing in an interview setting. And then once again, we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but recognize weaknesses and develop a plan to address these in the interview, when they ask you that question of what are your weaknesses? Second, you want to know the employer and the role that you're interviewing for. So learn about this organization. I can't stress enough how important it is for you to do your research when preparing for an interview. Know the website and information on it decently well. No one's saying you have to have it memorized, but it is important that you go on the website and go on, Glassdoor or even the company page on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn, if you go on the company page, it'll give you recent updates with that company and you'll be able to kind of get a sense of what's going on there. But it's really important that you study that website and get a sense for, what are they about? Look at the mission, vision. Do those things resonate with you? And then once again, study that job description. If you're able to as well, network with current or past employees at that organization to maybe ask them some questions ahead of time about company culture. That will only help you in the interview. So once again, before lights, camera, action, the two biggest things are your research and research and research, and then practice makes perfect. First, you also, especially nowadays in this virtual world, you want to test your technology. You don't want to be having to stress and scramble the day of your interview and you find out that your sound or your mic isn't working, your video is not showing up. So test your technology well in advance. Technical skills are, of course, one of the top competencies that employers are looking for in new hires. So confirm all your interview details ahead of time to prepare. What platform are you using? Zoom, WebEx, Google Hangouts. Be able to feel comfortable on there, know the different features and settings. And once again, get a friend, a roommate, mom, dad, whoever it may be, test out your equipment and practice getting on that platform and making sure your webcam, your internet connection, your sound is good. Once again, to alleviate any stress day of. And then from there, you want to set the scene. So determine where you're going to take the interview. You want to find a nice, quiet space in your home or wherever you're working from, wherever your setup is, and check your lighting and surroundings. If you have a window, maybe you can open the window a little bit or open your blinds so you have good lighting. And organize your setup, right? So remove extra, things that are going to distract you. You really want to minimize distractions in this setup so that you can really focus your attention on the camera and on the people that you're interviewing with. So, making sure all those extra sounds are eliminated. Think about if you are going to tidy up your background or you're going to use a virtual background, keep those things in mind. Ensure that your camera's placed where your face is nice and clear in the middle of your screen. And then once again, either know your resume really well that you submitted for the job application or have your resume handy for reference. And then part two, a few other reminders. Once again, Practice and practice as you're thinking about those common behavioral questions that you can expect in an interview, but don't memorize. You do not want to sound over rehearsed or scripted. So don't memorize your responses, but you want to make sure you have examples in mind when they do ask you those common questions. Be clear and concise in your answers. And then this is another tip that I've definitely used it for a lot of students and alumni that I've worked with. I've suggested this. It depends on your style. And so for some of you, this may be overwhelming, but another thing you can keep in mind as you are setting up for virtual or video interviews is the beauty of it being on your laptop is you can write some high level kind of thoughts or reminders for yourself on 2 or 3 Post-its that you can stick to your computer. So think about doing that if that works for you. Once again, may not work for everyone, but that is something that you can do for your video interviews. So then when it's showtime, right? Day of, your Zoom interview ready, you want to dress the part. So dress as you would for an in-person interview. And I say here, yes, even get out of the sweatpants, because if you're dressing like you would in your full nice outfit that you would wear for an in-person interview, it's going to help you even mentally be in that mindset of, I'm going into this interview and I'm going to get this job. You'll feel more yourself in that professional setting. And so dress the part and, have a nice professional top on for them to see in your interview. You also want to monitor your body language and eye contact. So once again, that's why it's so important or helpful to be able to test it out with a friend or roommate. You want to just get a sense for if there's, nervous tics you have or things like that. You want to sit up straight. And keep your focus and eye on the camera. You want to avoid staring at yourself during the interviews. I know that's always the hardest part in these Zoom meetings and Zoom interviews, but you want to speak and talk into the camera. Another tip I learned recently as well from someone when it comes to Zoom interviews that they were sharing how helpful it was for them on a recent group interview on Zoom was using presenter mode and pinning your video during the interviews. That way you can stay focused on yourself and not hone in on the interviewer's reactions. So I actually thought it was a pretty great tip and thought I would share it here. So think about, if that's something that would be beneficial, put yourself in presenter mode so you can focus on you. And then once again, be prepared, but be yourself, be natural and let yourself shine in that setting with all the examples and experiences that you want to let them get a better sense of. And so obviously, once it's showtime, you want to sit down prepared. And so for many of you, like I said, I'm sure we have all had a range of interviews and past experiences up until this point. But you want to think about, you definitely have those common behavioral questions that you can expect to be asked in many interviews nowadays. And so I've just listed a few here. I'm sure none of these are a shock to any of you, but you want to have answers prepared to a lot of these questions. And for sure, why are you interested in this role? What do you know about our company, right? And that's why it is important for you to do that research so that you know, why do you want to work here and why specifically this role at blank company. That's something that the interviewer wants to find out more in connection to your skills and experience. Why us, and then why this role? We're going to talk a little bit more about the weakness question. I know that was one that was submitted. It's a common one that people ask. How do I go about answering that without, shooting myself in the foot or anything like that? We're going to talk about that. And then anytime, you're going to get questions, for example, tell me about a challenge at work and how you dealt with it. Anytime you get a question like that, that's prompting an example. So tell me about a challenge, or tell me about a time when, give me an example of when you demonstrated leadership. Any of those, the interviewer and that employer or hiring manager wants to hear an example of how have you taken action? How do you solve problems? They want to get a sense of your behavior in the workplace and how you manage different situations, right? Are you going to fly off the handle? Do you stay calm and talk to your team? So think about those things, and I'll talk a little bit more about how you can have those examples prepared. And then just once again, a few others. What are you looking for in a position? Sometimes this isn't always asked, but some people will ask, why you might be leaving your current role. It's not always, doesn't always come up, but think about that. And then you may get the one at the end of why should we hire you? And that's kind of your final pitch to be able to sell yourself. So like I just mentioned, you want to provide in an interview answers of substance. So every time you compliment yourself, give an example, right? If I say I have great communication skills, I hope they believe me, but I need to provide an example and some substance as to why do I have great communication skills, or how do I have them, and demonstrate how I have them. So you want to think about a situation or an example that you can provide a past time in your current role and past roles where you were able to demonstrate that you have that skill. So one thing that I recommend, some of you have heard of the STAR method when it comes to interviewing, if you've been in past interviewing workshops or different presentations, but the other one that I recommend, because it's just even one letter quicker, is the CAR method, which is context, action, and result. So CAR. So the CAR method is in your responses when they ask you, especially those questions that are, give me an example, tell me about a time when, those are your prompters. And so you want to be able to, even in a clear and concise way. And so I say this with, especially in reference to the context, you don't want to tell a long-winded story about the situation, just a quick set it up. Where were you? What was your role? What was going on? And then the action. What was the problem that came up? What did you have to solve? And think about, as you're sharing your answer, what specifically did you do? How did you take action? And then result. What was the result of the action you took? How did things end up? I also say, in keeping in mind the result answer, it doesn't mean in your responses that everything has to end up all pretty and rainbows and unicorns. Oh my gosh, the team, we all loved each other and everything went smoothly and we got 100,000 people at the event. That doesn't always have to be the result. And so even if it is lessons learned and progress moving forward of how we will change things so that we can work more efficiently as a team or something like that, that is what the interviewer wants to hear. How did things end up? What did you learn from that experience? How will that help you moving forward as a professional? And then the other thing that is almost as important, of course, as your responses to the questions that they ask you is the part at the end of the interview where that interviewer is going to say, do you have any questions for us, right? And they'll usually leave, 5 or so minutes for questions for you to ask them. And the answer is yes, you always have questions to ask them. You want to be prepared with questions. And it's important for you to think about thoughtful questions that will allow you to glean more information that can help you, kind of figure out if this role and company is the best fit for you. And so this is just one example of kind of something you can keep in mind as you're thinking of questions. So, as you did your research, you might have learned a few things about the company. Maybe it's their vision, their mission, or certain projects or initiatives they're working on. And so you can say things like, I know this about your company, or I know you guys are working on this. I care about that as well because I also value sustainability or something like that. And once again, I'm just giving an example. Can you tell me more about that? So one example I gave here, if someone was in an interview, I know that Target is planning to broaden into the online market. I'm really interested in that because I have some experience with online sales from my job at Bee's Boutique. Can you tell me more about how you see this position helping with that goal? If I'm an interviewer and my candidate asks me that question, I'm going to be able to tell that not only did they research and see what was going on right now with their company, but they are actively trying to learn how they can fit into the future of the company and the bigger picture of where this position fits in with different goals of our organization and things like that. So think about, what do you want or need to know that isn't given to you in that job description? What are those details? What's more information about projects or programs that you're going to be responsible for that will help you figure out, is this right for me? And once again, you want to have, I'd say, 2 to 3 solid questions to ask your interviewer. I always say recommend having 5 just in case, but you'll normally have time for about 2 to 3 questions. And once again, here's just, obviously you guys are going to have access to this slide deck, so no need to jot all these down, but these are just some sample questions to ask. I have put in the blue color the 4 that are some of my favorite to ask in interviews that I've had in my own professional experience, because these questions have actually almost every time in every interview, they've given me the information I needed, that kind of extra bonus information to help me figure out, is this really what I want? And is this right for me? Do I see myself, in this organization and working on this type of team or these types of projects? So these are just some sample questions that you can have in your back pocket and prepared for when they say, do you have any questions for us? So after that, of course, you're going to wrap up the interview, close it up. You want to summarize why you're qualified. So once again, they may ask you that, why should we hire you? Why should I hire you question. You want to summarize your strengths and your qualifications that fit for the role, and why, what makes you an asset? What are you able to bring to the table, and how can you help this organization move forward? You want to, re-express your interest and enthusiasm. Once again, when you are in that video setting, your eye contact and smile is so important, of course, because we're no longer shaking hands or being able to do anything like that we were normally able to in person. And then from there, you want to find out what happens next. So normally at the end of the interview, most hiring managers will give some kind of wrap up. They may let you know next steps, but it doesn't always happen. And so you want to be able to take that opportunity to find out what happens next and ask about the timeline and when you can expect to hear back from them. And then also super important, make sure you have the contact information for the person who interviewed you. This definitely was a tip for mostly in-person interviews, because of course now everything is through email, but initially you were getting business cards and stuff, but make sure you have the emails or contact information for the people who interviewed you. In this case, right, you might be corresponding with someone in HR to set up your interview, but you're going to want to get the emails of the other professionals that might have been in your group interview so that you can send them a quick thank you email. So keep that in mind as well. And then after the interview, so once again, when you finish, you take a deep breath, you can jot down notes about any important details. And once again, when you do ask them those questions at the end and you're able to have a moment to get more information from them and ask your questions, you're perfectly fine, and they would expect you to take notes during that time. So feel free to jot down notes of what they're responding and how they're answering those questions that you've asked to give you those extra details and information you need. But then after the interview, also what's really important is sending that thank you note. So you want to send, within 24 to 48 hours, I'd say 48 hours is the max. You want to send a quick thank you note following up with them to thank them for their time and for the opportunity to interview for the position. If you feel really good about it and you want it, you want to just express once again how excited you are about the opportunity to join their team and how much you look forward to hearing from them soon. So send that thank you email, and once again, just let them know how appreciative you were of the time they took to interview as a candidate. Sometimes you may need to provide any additional materials they may have requested. So in certain roles or industries, right, maybe you have a portfolio and they said, oh, we'd love to see that. Can you send over the link or something? So send any follow-up materials. And then once again, I know this is always the most difficult part with interviews is, the waiting game and waiting to hear back. So I always recommend, if you haven't heard anything in about 2.5 weeks, I know things are especially busy right now, then it's okay to send a follow-up email and kind of check in on the timeline and get a sense of if they're still making decisions or if they've, moved forward with the different candidates. But I'd say 2 to 2.5 weeks. If you've heard nothing, you can follow up and kind of get a sense of where they're at. So other things, lastly, to keep in mind, once again, I know this was, a little different, of course, in normal in-person interview times, but these are just some things to keep in mind, and really they do operate the same even in video and virtual settings. So this is just how you're evaluated in an interview. So in that first 60 seconds, right, it's your clothing and kind of appearance. Normally it was a handshake, but poise, posture, making sure you're sitting up straight, body language, your voice, eye contact, and then smile and enthusiasm, right? They want to know you're excited to be there, you're excited to interview with them and talk to their team about this role. And then during the interview, how you're evaluated is your self-awareness and knowledge of yourself and your experiences and the skills that you bring to the table, and also, those weaknesses as well, knowing where you can improve. Also, your knowledge of the company, so showing that you did your research and you know what's going on. Your career goals, so just having a sense of, how is this role that you're interviewing for putting you in the right direction forward on your career path? And then your communication skills and interpersonal skills, right? So how are you communicating? Can you build rapport? Are you able to incorporate some of your personality or humor in different ways where these people feel like, oh, we get along with this person. We want to, get on a Zoom happy hour or something with this person and get to know them better as a person as well as professionally. Okay, so that from there is all the kind of general tips and strategies that I have for preparing for virtual interviews and just keeping things in mind so that you can make sure you are preparing your best self for your Zoom interviews, and also making sure that you have those examples in mind and those common questions you're not thrown off by. You have examples ready to share. You have experience, a wealth of experiences to think about how you've gained skills and how you've learned and grown professionally in each of those jobs or each of those experiences on your resume. So now we are going to be able to take some time here and talk to a hiring manager and someone who is a frequent interviewer and get a sense of a lot of these common questions that you all have about interviewing and how you can stand out, how you can put your best self, forward. We can talk to Kaitlin and get her advice from her perspective as someone who interviews a lot of people. What are some things that she sees and what advice would she give to you all? So I'm going to stop sharing from there and close out this and welcome back, Kaitlin. So, hi, Kaitlin.
Hi, Katie. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. Right. This is amazing, by the way. I will say, if I had this back when I was a recent graduate at Sonoma, I feel like I would have secured my very first job interview. So this is just absolutely amazing that the Career Center and Alumni Association can put this on. This is amazing. So great job.
Thank you. That's awesome. Yeah. Kudos to Tiffany, Audra, and Chelsea and the team. And I agree. I would have definitely benefited from a presentation like this because I knew nothing walking into interviews. And I still remember when I had my first interview and they said, do you have any questions for us? And I think I said, no, I think I'm good, And so like I said, we all have those moments and stories that we can remember and learn from the do's and don'ts of what to do for interviews. So I'm excited to kind of be able to ask you a few more of these do's and don'ts for today. So my first question for you is, when interviewing someone, what are some things that stand out and to impress you? And then on the flip side of that, what are some things that may reflect poorly on a candidate, like in an interview setting?
Yeah, I think this is a really great question because there are some general things that as a hiring manager, I kind of expect from interviewees that may come as a surprise to you all that sometimes people actually don't follow through with. So very simple things like being on time, whether that was in person pre-COVID, or like Katie had mentioned, kind of being prepared. If you have a Zoom or a Skype interview, just making sure everything is set up and ready to go. And also being prepared. So again, if it was an in-person interview, always having hard copies of your resume. Sometimes printers don't work. That does happen. That happened to me many times. Or if it's through a video conference, I think this is really important to note too, is really asking the interviewer, hey, do you have the most recent copy of my resume? There's been many times where maybe an out-of-date resume has been passed along to somebody on our HR team. So I actually might not have the most up-to-date information. So I think that's really important out of the gate to be prepared with. Another thing that Katie mentioned, which I'm a huge fan of, is taking notes as an interviewer or as an interviewee. I think it really shows that you're interested in what the role is about, what the person you're interviewing with is really saying, and that can also help you kind of close up anything additional at the end that you may have.
Right.
Another thing is reading the room. Again, Katie and I did not connect before this. I truly think these are just my humble opinions on what really sets somebody apart, but reading the room. So being yourself, but also being professional. I can only speak on behalf of my industry. I'm not in, corporate America, finance, or engineering. I'm more on the marketing side of things, but I think it's really important to just be yourself because at the end of the day, the company and the people you're interviewing with, you're going to spend way more time with than anybody else. And it's a two-way street. You want to make sure that they like you, but you like them and you can fit in there and you can really see yourself there. I think is really important. And then in terms of poorly, honestly, just the complete opposite of all of that. I think being late, not being prepared, having more of a relaxed demeanor than professional, I think is a really big thing as well. Dressing for success, not wearing a hoodie while you're working from home, or having a messy Zoom background, making sure that everything is clean and crisp, I think really sets the tone for, your professionalism and your interest for the role.
Those are great tips for sure. What can a candidate do to improve their chances before the interview? So anything leading up to that, like in the process, is there things that stand out to you that someone can do to help their chances before that interview?
Yeah. Again, reiterating a lot of what Katie said, be knowledgeable of the role in the company, research the values that the company may have, the history, how that company plays a role in its industry, I think is crucial. Because that also leads you to a question that is typically asked of why do you want to join this company, right? And, I often get the answer of, well, I love the product and I'm a big fan and I want to know more as a hiring manager. And I want to know, what do you know about our company? What do you know about where we stand in the marketplace? Why is our company kind of on the leading edge of things? And so that can come along with your research. I'd say another thing that's important too is know your interviewers. So look them up on LinkedIn. I don't find it weird if I get a random notification that somebody's looked at my LinkedIn profile, because I really think it just helps create that connection, that personal connection that you need with somebody. You're able to find common ground and interest, or understand kind of the path that they got to, which hopefully is the path that you eventually want to get to. I think is important. And then lastly, again, prepare, but don't come off as overly rehearsed. I've been in many interviews, surprisingly, where if I ask a question, somebody may kind of go on a tangent and might talk for 5 to 10 minutes. We have a 30-minute time slot. I have a lot of questions I want to get out there. And that can also cause somebody to lose a little bit of interest in what you might be saying. So, be prepared, be concise, be detailed, but don't go too much to where you're kind of going off onto a rant, I think is really important.
Yeah, no, that's such good advice. And I think your point too about, researching and being informed about the company versus just, once again, if I was interviewing with Kaitlin and showing up in that interview and she's like, well, why do you want to work for Hulu? Right. I'm not just going to say, well, I love The Handmaid's Tale. I need to be able to tell her, I've seen that Hulu focuses on, they have their Hulu Cares program. They go out in the community and they have different initiatives, and you guys work on, these different things, and you care about diversity and inclusion, right? I've shown that I know the product and what's out there, right, from what I see in the media of Hulu or whatever company, but I need to be able to speak to, as an organization, what are the things that they're doing. So I think that's such a great point. So my next question is, when you ask the introduction question of tell me about yourself, what are you looking to hear in an interviewee's response? What are the things that you want to know in the tell me about yourself or introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I think this question really relates to how people describe as like your 60-second elevator pitch. I mean, this is your one opportunity to, again, be clear and concise, but detailed at the same time about who you are, what you want to do, and how you plan on getting there. So I think, whether you're a recent grad or a few years into your career path, really kind of just giving a brief overview of that. And what is your ultimate goal with, again, your experience that you've had, whether that's, in school through internships or just your major or minor, or any professional experience as well. And some, top key qualities. And I kind of wrote down something that I think would really speak volumes. So something along the lines of, if I was a recent graduate, I'm a 2020 Sonoma State graduate with a communications major and business minor. I'm looking to pursue a career in marketing, particularly at X company, because I'm passionate about working for and selling a brand I stand by. I'm a people person and I enjoy being creative, and company culture is really important to me. So I know that X company would be a great fit for my long-term goals. And I think that right there tells me who you are, tells me what you want, and then we can continue kind of diving into all the fun questions that happen during interviews.
Yeah, that's great. That was, great example. I think, like you said, touching on being clear, concise. We don't need your whole life story, but focusing on who you are, what brings you today to this point of like applying for blank role at whatever company it is. So this one, I think, comes up for people often, and this is a common question, I think, especially in interviewing, that people are like, what do I do when this happens? If a candidate gets stumped by a question in an interview, so you throw out that wild card question that maybe they haven't practiced as much or thought about an example for, what do you suggest they do when they get a question that they're not as prepared to answer?
Yeah, this definitely happens. It's happened to me when I've been interviewing for roles, and it happens to, people I've interviewed at all my previous companies. And I'd say it is so important to take a moment and recognize that you're not going to know everything off the bat. And you could be interviewing for a massive tech company that might ask you a math problem on the spot, and you might need a couple of minutes to work through it. So I think it's important to kind of just recognize and state, that's a great question. Let me take a moment and let me think about it. And guaranteed, kind of the interviewer is going to be respectful of that, because I think, in my personal opinion, I would rather have somebody think of a really strong answer versus just giving me a blanketed answer just to answer the question. Totally. And if it's really stumping you, at the end of the day, it doesn't hurt to just say, that's a really great question. I'd love a little bit more time to think about this. I'll follow up with you after the interview once I have a bit more time to think through it. And I think that is completely acceptable.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And I think it's nice to hear that, because I think in the moment you don't think that you can do that. But if it really is something that you're stumped by, I think being able to say, you know what, let me think about that and share my answer with you. I think that's nice to know that is an option if you need that out. So outside of the actual interview, what are some things that matter to you as an interviewer that just, kind of you keep an eye on or stand out to you as you're kind of going through the process with someone?
Yeah. So again, I think in my industry, what is really important is, how is this person going to fit into my company as well as my team? Again, this could vary across different industries, but for me, I really take a look at, how did I personally connect with the interviewee? Did I establish some sort of personal connection, whether that's through a general interest that we both, figured out that we had, or, historical experience. I think that kind of always sets the tone for a really positive conversation. Another thing is, how do I see myself managing or working with this person? Like I mentioned earlier, and like everyone on this call is probably familiar with, again, you spend all your time with the people you work with. And so I want to make sure as a hiring manager that I know that I can work with this person and I can guide them to success, and making sure that that's kind of a smooth opportunity for the both of us. And then another thing is this person a good culture fit for my company? I think a lot of companies that are around right now, especially those startup techie marketing companies, are really big on company culture. And, we want to make sure that we hire somebody who can fit into that, who can really excel there, who, can do a really amazing job work-wise, but can also contribute to the company as a whole through outside activities or initiatives. And just generally being a well-rounded candidate. I think that's really important. So those are kind of the top things that I think stick out to me.
Yeah, those are great. It's a great list. Is there anything that would automatically remove a candidate from your pool?
I'd say maybe in years past, I would say, if the experience wasn't there for a candidate, it would be kind of an automatic, well, we need 1 to 2 years experience, which I'm sure, again, a lot of you on this call are probably experiencing is, oh, where do I get that 1 to 2 years of experience? But what I will say, which I think is really amazing, is a lot of companies these days are taking other things into consideration. General background, how can that translate to the job you're interviewing for if you don't have that immediate background that, correlates to that, I think is really important. Again, the culture, like I talked about, how are you as a well-rounded person? So I wouldn't say that there's anything that immediately would stop me from interviewing somebody, because I think as hiring managers, no matter what company you work for, we are all being pushed to have more open-minded, candidate pools and really finding the best fit. So No, I wouldn't say anything would stop me.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, short answer.
That's good. I'm sure that for many people listening, that is a nice thing to hear. So there's not a major red flag that immediately will send them out of the pool. So this, of course, is also one of the most popular questions when it comes to interviewing that I think many people, especially in early interviews, as you're refining your answers and things like that. What advice do you have for how to best answer that question of what are your weaknesses?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that question. So hopefully if you guys have interviews with anybody, they don't ask that, but it is a very common question. Because sometimes we just, as hiring managers, you have to get to the point. You want to know, we know you have your positives, but what are your weaknesses? And I think one piece of advice that I've personally followed when I've been interviewing is to say an actual weakness. I don't want to hear that, oh, I take on too many tasks and that can be overwhelming.
I work too hard.
Or
Yeah.
work too hard.
Yeah.
I'm not interviewing you or going to hire you for that answer. It's more, I want to know what a true weakness is, because we all have our weaknesses at the end of the day. And one of them in particular, I think one big tip I have is stating a weakness, but that doesn't necessarily correlate to the job you're interviewing for. So an example would be if you are interviewing for a entry-level marketing role where maybe you're reading the job description and it says things like, campaign management or, managing, executive tasks and things like that. I wouldn't necessarily say that your weakness is that you have trouble prioritizing and that you have trouble staying organized. That's going to be a big no.
Right.
But what I would maybe recommend is if it's not on kind of the list of to-dos for the role, let's say presenting isn't on there, maybe stating, one of my weaknesses right now is presenting, but then kind of follow up and say how you're going to overcome that. My weakness right now is presenting. However, I'm trying to take as many opportunities as I can to hone in on that skill, whether that is taking part of interviewing classes or presenting classes, or taking part of any internal opportunities I can to continue to build that skill is really important to me. So I think that's my best piece of advice, is state a weakness, but something that doesn't necessarily affect the job that you are interviewing for.
Yeah, that's a good tip. And I would just echo the latter part of what Kaitlin expressed, which once again is that weakness question is not meant to, they're not trying to have you fall on your face in an interview. It's more of, once again, going back to that self-awareness. How well do you know yourself, and how well do you know the things you're really good at, your strengths, and also the areas that you're continuing to enhance. And so you don't need to go in depth about, I really suck at this, or I need to get better. You, once again, you name that weakness of what it is. And it's not, I'm a perfectionist. It's not, I work too hard. Like Kaitlin said, name something that's real and specific. And you want to quickly state what is something, one action that you've taken to make that a little less of a weakness, or you're working on actively improving it. So I'm not really a big picture thinker, and I'm working actively on, focusing more on collaborating with my teammates who are, and learning from how they are viewing, different goals in the organization, and kind of getting a sense of how I can do that, more often. So you want to state it, name it, and quickly address what's one thing you're doing to work on making that a little bit less of a weakness. So last few questions for you. What is the most important profile you look at when reviewing a candidate to decide on interviews? So thinking about all the application materials, so LinkedIn versus resume versus cover letter, what's most important to you?
Yeah, I would say, in my personal opinion, resume and LinkedIn go hand in hand. I saw somebody in the chat maybe earlier ask about a cover letter. I think that's very dependent on your industry, whether or not they require one. I wouldn't say that is a vastly needed thing for every job interview. I personally would rather hear about your general background and the why you're interested, when I'm talking to you, versus written on a piece of paper. But I would say resume and LinkedIn go hand in hand. And from a hiring manager, the first thing I do when I'm actually given a resume is immediately go to their LinkedIn. I want to make sure that their LinkedIn matches what I'm seeing on their resume, making sure it's up to date, making sure there's no corners that are being cut. whether that's public on LinkedIn and then internally only on a resume. I also like seeing who they're connected to. If I see a common connection, sometimes I do reach out to that person and say, hey, I'm actually interviewing so-and-so for a role right now. What's your history with them? And I actually do that as an active hiring manager, at my current company and my previous roles. So I know that Katie had recently done a LinkedIn seminar as well. And I will say LinkedIn to me is one of the most important things you can have as a professional. Making sure it's public, making sure it's up to date, because I can guarantee you hiring managers are looking at that actively and using that in tandem with someone's resume.
Yeah, 100%. I was going to say, for those that were on the LinkedIn webinar, if you weren't, then there's a recording available for you. But to Kaitlin's point, and we even talked about mutual connections, she just shared that example of if she sees someone she's connected to, she may go ahead. And that's an easy point where she can check in and can this person vouch for so-and-so and say, oh yeah, I work with them on this, they're great. And then she gets to feel better about, all right, let's interview them. Let's explore moving them forward in the process. So nowadays, of course, in the pandemic, how can a candidate best prepare for a virtual interview? I know I talked about a few different tips, but thinking about the differences between a video interview and in person, what are some things that you would say how they can best prepare in the video setting?
Yeah. And that's, it's just crazy that we even have to kind of have that, question in our back pocket. But I have done my fair share of Zoom interviews during this time of COVID-19. And I think my biggest takeaway as a hiring manager is I'm trying not to look at them any different than I do as if it was an in-person interview. I think whether or not there's a screen in between us or there's a table in between us in an office, I think, you should be looking at it the same. And I think Katie kind of mentioned this earlier in the webinar, but, still dressing for success, having a clean background, taking notes, doing everything that you would do in person, I think is crucial, because I personally don't think that they're different in any way. I would just say, you might have to be a little bit more prepared because there can be technology issues. Again, like I mentioned, somebody might not have your most up-to-date resume. You want to make sure that sounds are off. I mean, even just a few minutes ago, I had a reminder pop up on my calendar. So making sure that things are muted and your cell phone is off. I think just little things that you can do to make sure you're as professional as possible, like you would be in person.
Yeah, that's great. It's perfect. And then my last question for you before we just open it up to other questions that have come in through the Q&A during our hour today is, after an interview, how much does a follow-up thank you email or note mean to you? And I know many people go, did it really make a difference? So would love your answer on that.
Yes. Always send one. I cannot reiterate how important sending a thank you note is for multiple reasons. I think one, it reiterates that you're actually interested in the job. And I remember when I was, going for, I think my second job in my industry, I was reading up on interview tips and tricks. And one thing that I read that truly has stuck with me for almost 6 years now, which is scary, is that there's a surprising amount of people who interview for roles who actually don't want that role. They might just be interviewing just to interview and to have something to do. But as a company and a hiring manager, we're investing in the people who actually want this opportunity. So I think sending a thank you note reiterates that, hey, I really appreciate the time you took with me. I can vouch for all hiring managers. Everybody has very busy schedules. It can be very taxing having back-to-back interviews or meetings. So taking the time to acknowledge, that the person took that time to spend with you and interview you. And again, it just reiterates how much you want that job and that opportunity. And I think a couple of interesting ways to really kind of spice up a thank you email, if you will, is reiterating something that the interviewer had said to you, which is why I think taking notes during an interview is something that you should totally do if you're comfortable doing so. So you're able to follow up and say, Hi, Kaitlin. Thanks so much for your time meeting with me today. I really wanted to acknowledge what you had called out during our interview, which was X, Y, and Z. This is really important to me because of ...
Yeah.
And to me, that shows again that you were listening and you took the time and you want this opportunity. And I think one other thing that's interesting that I've told a lot of people I know in my industry to do as well is if there is something that you did answer during the interview that you feel like you can expand upon a little bit more, I think that's so amazing if you follow up with a thank you note and say, I know you asked this question during the interview, but I wanted to expand on it a little bit more. Here is what I would continue to do, X, Y, and Z. I think those two things can really kind of set the tone from a general thank you note to someone who really, really wants the opportunity and catches my eye as a hiring manager.
Yeah. Wow. That's a really awesome tip. And I think something that you don't think about in the moment of even just wanting to send off that quick, okay, let me just thank you for your, the time. But I think those are some great pointers of how you can just stand out above the crowd a little bit in the midst of all those thank you notes they might be getting from the amount of interviews they do. So yeah, I love that. Well, that once again is all the questions that I prepared for our, ask the interviewer and the hiring manager. So now I will, welcome Audra back to be able to feed us any additional questions that might have come in throughout our time together and things that we didn't, maybe expand upon too much yet. So yeah.
Great, thank you. This has been really awesome. I love the addition of Kaitlin in this webinar and just the two of you really chatting through these things. I think it's really valuable. We do have a couple great questions in the chat. So first, in an atmosphere where all interviews and meetings are virtual, what are some ways to differentiate your interview and stand out? That's from Brittany.
That's a great question. Do you want to go first, Kaitlin? You want me to go?
Speaking of interview tips, let me take a moment to think about this. Katie, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I can start. I think the one I can think of immediately from like gut response is in this setting, once again, knowing the amount of interviews they might be doing via Zoom or Google Hangouts, whatever it may be, I think finding a way to, at the end of the day, when you're looking at a job description, interviewing for a role, there might be things on that job description that you have 7 out of 10 things that are listed in the qualifications or requirements, right? And you're like, I don't have necessarily as much experience in these 3, but like my passion is there, my work ethic. And the thing to keep in mind, especially when you are applying to jobs, that job description, it is a wish list. It is the ideal candidate has got all 10 of these things. They're awesome. They're fun to work with, right? Good personality, team player. So keep that in mind. It's the ideal candidate wish list. If you don't have all those, doesn't mean you shouldn't apply, but you can train on those different skills and things that are maybe missing of those 3 things you feel like I don't have as much experience there, but you cannot train passion. You cannot really train, for the most part, work ethic. Those are things that you need to have and bring to the table already, just based on your character and how you have established yourself in the workplace. So I think something that you can do is make sure in your responses that your passion for the type of work that you're interviewing for is really there. They can hear how much you care about this type of work, how interested you are in moving it forward. And then also I think the other thing that's really great is find a way to incorporate your personality, and I think that's important. Like Kaitlin said, you want to be able to, can I connect with this person as a person? Is there some things in common? Oh yeah, I'm also from Minnesota, like things like that. Like, are there some shared or common experiences that you can kind of connect on? And so for me, in interviews and especially thinking about video, like I want to be able to show people that, especially in stressful times, I can find a way to bring in humor and make light of getting us through the stressful times with humor and things like that. So incorporating my personality and being able to kind of find a way to insert a joke here and there and still a professional way would be, just you can find a way to kind of show a little bit of who you are as a person, but still in the professional setting of your interview.
Yeah, and I think from my side, I actually have experience with a lot of video interviews because I've managed multiple satellite offices. So I've interviewed folks in New York trying to move to San Francisco and so on and so forth, LA to New York. So Outside of COVID, just general interviewing skills via, technology, if you will, I think something that can really set you apart is understanding how the company sets you up for success if you are working virtually or working from home or working not from a headquartered office. I think as a hiring manager, that's a really important question to ask because working from home and not being around maybe an entire company or even a handful of people, if it's a satellite office, that's something I want to know that you're open to doing, that you're comfortable doing. And I also, would love to know, what are your expectations with working from remote, and what are your expectations from a company, during this time? So I think just reiterating your comfort level with that and what your best practices are during this time, how you stay organized, how you kind of separate home from work. And then asking what the company does, I think really speaks volumes because again, it just shows that you are invested in next steps, basically, for a role, especially during this time.
Great, thank you. And I added a useful article in the chat for everyone to check out about using backgrounds or not. Maybe keeping it neutral is a better way to go. The next question is from Jennifer. How would you suggest handling any technical problems that might happen during a virtual interview?
I've had this a couple of times. Again, technology is not fun. I will say even Friday, my work computer, the speaker stopped working. Somehow miraculously, it's working now. Earlier today with Audra and Tiffany, I was using headphones to speak and then that went out. So I would just say, be calm, cool, and collected. Technology is bound to have its ups and downs. I will say back in the spring when COVID first hit, I was interviewing somebody and Zoom was not working. It was freezing. Wi-Fi goes out. And so at the end of the day, you still want to move forward with the interview. My suggestion is take a hold of the situation and say, I don't think this is working for us. Do you mind if I call you and we can interview that way? I think that's a really great kind of next step where you still get that opportunity. Might not be face-to-face, but it's the next best thing than just kind of shifting the interview or not having it at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and my quick thing, Kaitlin's point is perfect. And I was just going to say similar that don't panic in that moment, just, take a moment. And I think you could even make a joke of even with the test run, that I did, you just never know how technology or your internet is going to behave. And it's not always reliable or stable. So being able to try to say give me a moment, let me see if I can either, whatever it is, if it's video, sound, let me see if I can just fix this. And so sorry about that. And like Kaitlin said, if it's really not working, would we be able to move this to a call? I think that's great, being able to just move forward. How can I solve this and keep moving forward with the interview?
Great. From Medlock, when you are changing career paths, what is the best way to make a connection or catch the attention enough of someone else to give you a chance? So maybe changing from one industry to another.
I can go on that one. So I would say my best advice with that question would be if you are changing industries or maybe moving even job functions within different, career field, think about, as even Kaitlin talked about earlier, LinkedIn is going to be your best friend. And so find, especially, thinking about your alumni network and your community, not only of, other Sonoma State folks that you might have graduated with or other alumni, but who also is already in your network that might be at a company in that industry you're looking to get into. So in the LinkedIn webinar, and I think they had shared the recording in the chat for those that missed it, I showed how you can use the alumni tool on LinkedIn to find other Sonoma State alumni in specific industries. And so I would reach out to some of those alumni and ask for an informational interview, say, hey, I would love to have kind of a career chat with you, 15, 30 minutes of your time, 30 minutes of your time max to learn about, if I was reaching out to Kaitlin per se, hey, Kaitlin, I'd love to hear more about your journey to getting to Hulu and what advice you might have for me as I'm looking for similar type roles within entertainment and media. I'd love to learn, kind of how you've been able to, shape this path for yourself. And, Kaitlin will say, oh, sure, I'd be happy to talk to you about my path. And you can get on a call or Zoom, whatever, if you want to do Zoom coffee chat, and being able to ask that person questions about the industry to give you more information as you're preparing to kind of move yourself in a line in that direction. the informational interview is going to be the best tool in that process.
And it might take some time or a few
Yes.
different informational interviews or connecting
Yes.
to several people in that industry.
Yeah.
It might
Patience
not
is
just
a
happen
virtue.
overnight.
Yeah, absolutely.
But keep working at it and identify the things that are maybe not represented in your resume that should be in that new industry, or how do you speak about yourself differently about those transferable skills.
Yeah.
We can help you about that in the Career Center.
There you go.
Okay, our last question is from Karen, and it fits nicely with what you just responded about. On LinkedIn, how reliable are the viewed by referrals? Are the jobs that show up as recommended for you really a good idea to follow up on?
Can jump into that
Yeah,
first.
go for it.
I mean, again, I think I don't want to turn this into a LinkedIn webinar, but I cannot stress enough how important LinkedIn really is. I, helped, a lot of my jobs that I've gotten have been through LinkedIn. A lot of HR recruiters in a lot of industries use LinkedIn as a resource to reach out to candidates. And that's why I think it's so important to always have your LinkedIn up to date if you are looking for a new opportunity. I think there's different toggles on, I'm interested in new opportunities, and that way hiring managers and HR recruiters can really see that. But I would say 100% trust what you see on LinkedIn, because a lot of jobs that you see on company websites are sourced out to third parties. And yeah, a short answer, yes, 100% trust it, make sure it's up to date. I've had a lot of Sonoma State alumni reach out to me over LinkedIn messaging, who are recent graduates, just to kind of get my advice. And hopefully you reach out to somebody who's responsive. I will say I'm responsive, so I would hope others are as well. And it's a great, trustworthy website to utilize, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd echo all that. And I would just quickly share that one of my brief LinkedIn highlights, on top of what Kaitlin shared of how she's used it, is when I was leaving my last role, part of the reason I found my job at UCLA is because there was a woman working at UCLA that I had a mutual connection with at Colorado State. And so I reached out to the Colorado State connection and said, would there be any way that you could put me in touch with Danica and I could talk to her about her role at UCLA? And from there, I had an informational interview and she shared a job announcement with me a month later. So use LinkedIn to find people within your network and find those new people you can add to your network that might be, a second degree connection of your neighbor from home, and go to that neighbor. Hey, would you be able to put me in touch with so-and-so? And you just never know what can happen from getting connected to those people and having those conversations. So LinkedIn is the best, and you'll definitely be able to find Kaitlin and I there.
I just want to add one caveat. On the LinkedIn, when they're sending you those referrals or resources or jobs, you do really, I want to just hone in on what Kaitlin said about making sure your profile is complete and using keywords that you would find in the job descriptions that you'll be applying for. And there are tools online like JobScan that will review your resume and say, hey, this doesn't match the job you're applying for. Use more of these keywords. That's really important with LinkedIn as well, because they're going to send you jobs that are related to your profile. If you don't have those keywords or key skills or qualifications that you are in those jobs you're applying for, it's not going to match you with the correct things. So yes, use it, but be aware that you have to be using it most effectively. And that depends on you and what you put into it.
Yeah, totally. And I was just gonna say, last thing I'll add there too, like Audra said, if the jobs that are getting suggested for you or recommended to you by LinkedIn that match up with your profile and the experiences you've had on there, but once again, maybe for all the career changers or people out there looking to try to do something new, and your LinkedIn profile doesn't maybe reflect as much of experience in X industry, that's where you can use the job search alerts on LinkedIn. And the webinar I did a few weeks ago on LinkedIn shows you how you can set up those job search alerts for roles or different jobs within a different industry than you're currently in. And that way you're still going to get alerts for those new opportunities that maybe LinkedIn in the current time isn't going to show you those as recommended because you have limited experience there, but you can still make sure that you're getting up to date with new postings of the area you're looking for jobs in.
Great. And Katie, you go into so much depth on LinkedIn in the tackling the job search. I know we've talked about it a couple times and it's been in the chat, but this is the end of our 3-part webinar series. So there are 3 recordings that you will be able to access along with the resources that Katie has shared. So we're grateful that you've attended today, and we hope you use those webinar recordings and resources. And of course, connect with any of us on LinkedIn, reach out for support and help, ask questions, and keep your head up and your positive thinking as you are tackling that job search and looking at a change in industry potentially.
Yeah.
So thanks, Katie. Thanks, Kaitlin, and Tiffany and Chelsea and everyone for today.
Yeah. Thanks so much, everyone.
Have a wonderful afternoon.
Bye.